Just a second here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to today's special webinar session titled Someone is Watching, Is Anyone Listening? This particular webinar is dedicated for today's UNESCO World Press Freedom Day. Before I begin our webinar, as a tradition, let me do the treaty recognition. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, those who have tuned with us today, as I said, it's a very special day. And in the beginning, we would like to pay our homage and tribute to 5 lost journalists in the Ukraine war. And since the Russians' invasion on 24th February, so far 13 journalists and media workers killed in Ukraine. 16 came under fire with 10 injured. Journalists and civilians must be protected according to the international humanitarian law. Today, we are going to share the photos of the deceased journalists so that we remember where they were. And I request all of us to kindly spend 30 minutes in remembrance of their contribution to humanity and bringing the truth to the news. Thank you. And let me also name the deceased ones: Oksana Baulina from Ukraine, Pierre Zakrzewski, Alexandra Kuvshonvia, Brent Renaud, and Evgeny Sakun. Our deep respect to the journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, just to set the context of today's webinar, and I would like to start by quoting the last 2 Nobel Peace Laureates, those who received their prizes from the field of journalism. As we all know, Maria Ressa from Philippines and from Russia, those who received the Nobel Peace Prize, I think it's a wonderful recollection and contribution of their works. And Dmitry Muratov received Nobel Peace Prize from Russia, and he is the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, who shared the prize with Maria Ressa. And I think when awarding the Peace Prize, the Norwegian Nobel Committee mentioned that the Novaya Gazeta is the most independent newspaper in Russia today, with a fundamentally critical attitude towards power. And in this regard, I would also like to quote Maria Ressa's acceptance speech, some part of it, not all, as she says, and I quote, "At the core of journalism is a code of honor, and mine is layered on different worlds, from how I grew up, when I learned what was right and wrong from college, and the honor code I learned there. Truth and ethical honor is intersected with an arrow into this moment where hate, lies, and divisiveness thrive. As only the 18th woman to receive this prize, I need to tell you how gender disinformation is a new threat and is taking a significant toll on the mental health and physical safety of women, girls, trans, and LGBTQ plus people all over the world. Social media is a deadly game for power and money, what Shoshana Zuboff called surveillance capitalism, extracting our private lives for outsized corporate gain. Our personal experiences are sucked into a database organized by artificial intelligence, then sold to the highest bidder. With this humble reflection, let me introduce our distinguished panelists, and I'm going to briefly read out their bios and outstanding contribution to world peace. And first, of course, our Honorable Senator Marilu Mcfedran, who was born and raised in Manitoba in 1985. She became the youngest lawyer to be named a member of the Order of Canada. And in the field of education and governance, she is recognized internationally. She has co-founded several widely recognized not-for-profit organizations, those who work for systemic change, and including those include Women Legal Education and Action Fund, in short, LEAF, the Metropolitan Action Committee on Violence Against Women and Children, in short, METRAC, and Lived Rights. She was also the Dean of University of Winnipeg Global College in Manitoba, Canada between 2008 and 12. And from 2008 and 19, she was a tenured professor at the University of Winnipeg as well. She was the founding director of the Institute for International Women's Rights at Global College from 2009 to 16, and the creator director of the annual Human Rights University Summer Institute based in the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And in October 2016, Senator joined with the invitation from Canadian Prime Minister as an independent senator to our Senate. With this brief introduction, let me welcome the Senator, and I will introduce the rest of our distinguished panelists as we move forward. And without further ado, Honorable Senator, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, and thank you also, Gary Sent, for the initiative in organizing this. To co-panelists, I just really want to say how honored I am to be on this panel with you. And I will share anecdotally that this is the first time that Salsella and I have been face-to-face. We have been together through many adventures, from the moment when Salsella and her colleague Shima and their families landed at Dulles Airport on the Labor Day long weekend from Afghanistan. It is just such a pleasure, Salsella, to see you safe, to see you well, and I'm so pleased to be able to hear what you have to say tonight, as well as congratulations to you, Amber, with your much-deserved honor. I have been following your work, so I totally agree with the jury on that. And Mehmet, it's an honor to meet you. I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation. I'm going to speak very briefly. The equation that I think is most important for us to keep in mind, particularly in the context of the illegal invasion of Ukraine, but also very relevant to any conflict that we see anywhere. It's the truth-telling of journalists and journalism that actually feeds and is essential. It is the lifeblood of a functioning democracy. Not a perfect democracy, but a functioning democracy. And so to each and every journalist and I thank you. And I'm really looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. Now let's move on. And before I introduce the next distinguished speaker, it is also our pleasure to have our advisor, Mr. Gary Sent, with us, and he's going to conduct the moderated Q&A session at the end of our session. So today, let's invite Salsella Nassari first to share her thoughts with us. And a brief bio that she sent us is impressive and very inspiring. Ms. Salsella Nassari is a poet, writer, and human rights activist. And for the past decade, before Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, she worked as a lawyer for the Afghanistan Bar Association and the Attorney General of Afghanistan. With the rise of Taliban terrorist regime, she couldn't return to normal life like everyone else in Afghanistan. So she started a new life by sending asylum seekers to immigrant countries with the support of Canadian government. And she is also here now. And we welcome Salsella Nassari to this session Floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Honorable Senator Mcfedran, I love you. And esteemed friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here with you in this time today to share my story and that of Afghanistan, a people and country where Canada contribute to development and prosperity with treasure and blood. We recognize and honor the sacrifice made by all Canadian men, women, and thank their families. The 20 years long partnership of Canada with our people have brought changes in the Afghan society which are visible even after the fall of Kabul. We have vibrant media and vocal civil society and continue to champion the freedom of the press and with individual and social liberty and human rights in the face of countless hurdles. Let me take this moment's occasion of 3rd May and congratulate the courageous Afghan media for the great valor and professionalism showcased in the face of terror and training. Alongside media, the participation of brave Afghan women and reshaped the destiny of our country was matchless. The last 20 years transformed Afghanistan into a democratic country of free speech, elections, social freedom, and individual liberties. Dear Canadians, please allow me to thank the people and government of Canada for helping Afghans after the fall of Kabul. Our basic human rights, such the right of education, were taken away from us and we feared an unjust persecution. The support from Canada helped us run away from a dark future, and thousands of Afghans, including myself, found a new home in Canada. Despite the success story, we haven't been able to accomplish the mission. Tens of thousands hope that Canada will finally be their home to safety as well. Those are either friends and partners who share a personal history of working with Canada, or a woman, minority group, and media who are no longer safe in Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, free speech, women and human rights, civil liberties, and gains of the past 20 years and the great danger. Journalists, critics, civil society, and rights activists, professors, and members of the former government and are hunted down every day. Based on the statistic of the Committee for the Protection of Journalists and an agency supporting of media in Afghanistan, over 500 media outlets have been shut down after the Taliban take over Afghanistan. Refreshing the surveys of these two organizations, 87% of the 11,378 active journalists in 2020 have lost their jobs today. Out of 11,000 journalists, 1,500 were women, which only 300 are active today because all others have lost their jobs. Revenge killings and enforced disappearance having skyrocketed in the past few months, and women have been beaten up, tortured, and jailed for demanding the right to work and education. Schools have been closed to women and girls. They are denied the right to work in the public domain and travel without a male companion. In short, Afghanistan, particularly women, are living in an open air cage. We all have a moral responsibility to change that and support women and their rights throughout all possible means. This support of Afghans doesn't do good only in the short term, but in the long run, and advise Afghanistan from becoming a harbor for regional and global tourists again. This partnership must continue for millions of girls like me who face an uncertain future in the urban and rural area of the country. Their school must be reopened without delays. As my ending note, let me wish you everyone a happy International Day Freedom of Press and thank the people and government of Canada for hosting us. Grateful for your hospitality and the opportunity. And special thanks from you, Madam Senator. You help me and you help my family in the injured situation, and our people appreciate from your help. We never forget it, your kindness. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry.
Thank you, Sylvia Naseri, for sharing your personal experience with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are moving forward, and definitely your voices are heard. And today we have Honorable Senator with us, and we look up to her to support the cases like yours. Not only she is also supporting many of the unheard voices. So thank you once again to Senator for your courageous work here.
Thank you.
So thank you, Salsala. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mehmet Yavuz from Peace and Conflict Studies program in University of Manitoba, and he's a PhD candidate now, and he's also a contract faculty with the Department of Criminal Justice at University of Winnipeg. Mehmet is also a 2021-22 Rabbi Michael Melchior Peace and Conflict Studies Fellow at Arthur V. Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice at St. Paul's College. Mehmet's forthcoming article examines the increased censorship in Turkey and why the current government considers the presence of media freedom a threat and punishes journalists and media owners who dispute government policies. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to use PowerPoint slides that Mehmet wishes to share with us. So bear with me 1 second here. Yes, Mehmet, you're good to go. Unmute kindly. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your story and honoring your people, Salsala. I think it's really hard to talk after you, and I appreciate your story. Thank you so much again. If you can make it bigger, the screen, that'd be wonderful, if that's possible, Ahmed. And I'll just make sure that. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I know I have 10 minutes for my talk, and I'll just make sure to end within that time frame. So first, I want to talk about the 3 essential roles of journalism without boring anyone, hopefully. And then I want to focus on the threats that journalists are facing on a daily basis in Turkey. I will use Turkey as an example, since I've done extensive research on Turkey's media policies. But also the other reason is I chose Turkey is that many international human rights organizations would call Turkey as the graveyard of journalism due to the challenges that journalists are facing, such as costly lawsuits, death threat, imprisonment, and so on and so forth. So this is one of the reasons. And I'm hoping this will also give us a better picture to understand the challenges that journalists are facing in the region, and under really a huge threat on a daily basis. So if you can just go to next slide, please. So this is the map of Turkey. And in focusing on we can click next if possible. Ahmed, my slides, my setting somehow is not working. So Dr. Kavsar Ahmed will help us to just kind of click the next, where I'm not sure if that's, I think if you can click the next slide, the map one. Perfect, thank you so much. The previous one, please, yes. And in focusing on the current government of Turkey, throughout my talk, I want to explain why the current government in Turkey considers the presence of media freedom a threat, and how it punishes journalists and media owners who dispute government policies. So when it comes to journalism, as we all are aware, journalism is mainly considered as a guardian of democracy. And in many quote unquote stable democracies, journalism belongs to the public realm because it functions to serve public's interest, and also nations, citizens and peoples too. And if you can go to next slide, please, you will see here Pippa Norris sort of identifies three essential roles of journalism or media, news media. And the first one is watchdog role, monitoring government's accountability and responsiveness. And the second one is civic forum role, ensuring diversity in public debates. And the last one is agenda setting role, focusing on urgent problems and communicating citizens' concerns to the government, but also pushing the government to be more responsive to the issues that locals are facing on a daily basis. So these essential roles are vital in ensuring government accountability. So this is why the role of journalists are very critical. And we all know that investigative journalists are facing a lot of different issues too. So we need indeed journalists who hold the government responsible, but also in that picture, we are also seeing how journalists are under attack when they simply try to do their job. So if you can click next slide, please. And my friends and former colleagues also expressed their concerns around safety and security, like being, maybe next, another slide, please. And around safety, security, and being a target or public shaming from other politicians too. So they really live with that fear on a daily basis when they simply try to do their job. But there are also a lot of different research proves that independent media contributes to building a healthy democratic society by influencing decision-making processes, but again, keeping governments responsible for and accountable too. But historically, journalists in Turkey have faced many challenges, as stated in numerous reports by the international organizations from Freedom House to Human Rights Watch. So today, Turkey faced the largest media crackdown throughout in its history, and virtually all independent media outlets have been shut down, and hundreds of journalists are jailed. So those who are trying to do journalism, including some small media outlets, are facing costly lawsuits under a law that criminalizes the insulting of officials, which would be president. So next slide, please. So there is also this vague law that anyone can possibly insult president, even if you comment on anything about presidents, and they may indeed face imprisonment too. So the passage of this unprecedented law, such as anti-terror legislation that the government would use as an excuse, has also undermined journalistic activities too. This anti-terror legislation has really become one of the biggest challenges, not only for journalists, but also for the distributors, activists, publishers, and academics in Turkey too. And according to, we are seeing on this slide, via Media Monitor, 35 journalists were sentenced to a total of 92 years, 6 months, and 24 days in prison in 2021 alone. But we are also seeing at least 56 journalists in 2021, and 141 journalists in the last 5 years were assaulted. So if you can click the next slide. Although the Turkish media have been challenged for as long as they have existed, threats to media freedom reached a boiling point during the Gezi Park protests. So the Gezi Park protests were the first substantial one against the current government, which retaliated by exerting even greater pressure on the media. So if Kausar can click the next one, the picture, and even this impacted certainly journalists and news media outlets too. So the Gezi Park protests began when the current government at the time decided to cut down all the trees in one of the only green areas in places in Taksim, Istanbul, to build luxury buildings and apartments. So initially 100 activists come together and they participate in a sit-in protest. But after the police used the tear gas and water cannons to defuse the protesters, the issue became more than protecting the park. So, and soon, obviously this response turned into a larger protest against the government's authoritarian policies, and people started holding similar sort of protests nationwide too. But indeed, these protests impacted journalists dramatically, because we saw censorship, we saw self-censorship that were very apparent and clear during these times too. So next slide, please. And one more. While CNN International was broadcasting these protests live, next slides, its Turkish counterpart, CNN Turk, chose to air a documentary about penguins instead. So this was really the breaking point for the protesters and prompted people to sort of turn to social media to voice critiques of the censored media, which later became known as the penguin media. And next slides, please. Even, people were just there was rumors, right? People were joking about that. Then they were sharing these images and saying, hey, now you can start talking about this protest because there are penguins. Next slide, please. And you're also seeing, even penguins are watching the protest. Let's start airing the protest. So what also was interesting during these protests, Twitter users at the time was 1.8 million on May 29 when the protest started. But then this number dramatically increased to 9.5 million during and after the Gezi Park protest. Perhaps we also should ask this question, the role of social media when journalists face heightened risk of censorship and threats by the politicians or by the systems as a whole too. So later on, and during the protests, president also portrayed protesters as looters or traitors, and those who spoke against him were subsequently threatened too. And as a result, after receiving many threats from politicians and the government's supporters, a significant number of artists as well as journalists fled to different countries, and hundreds of journalists were fired or were subjected to the physical violence as well. So in 2012, more journalists were arrested in Turkey than in any other countries in the world. And the numbers even surpassed China, considering the population and also autocratic regime over there too. So this is why some international human rights organizations define Turkey as the graveyard of journalism. And aside from legal pressure, the government used also other measures to control the media and journalists as well, including online banishment, conglomerate and commercial pressure, as well as judicial suppression too. So my final notes is that Turkey is considered an important sort of location due to its geographic position between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. So democratic and peaceful Turkey is not only crucial for itself, but also for the neighbors that often run by dictatorship in the region. And journalists are making sure that public voices are heard despite all these challenges that they are facing on a daily basis. But international solidarity certainly is very critical, just being in solidarity with the journalists who are being oppressed by different systems or regimes all around the world too. And I'm happy to talk more, but I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with colleagues and people who care for journalism and media. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mehmet, for giving us very first-hand situation in Turkey with regards to journalism and journalists. And now our final panelist today here, and I'm going to introduce her briefly, Amber Bracken, and she She says that she's a lifelong Albertan, and she's a journalist, photographs, and her photographs primarily across Western North America to represent the global issues in her own backyard. Her work explores intersections of race, environment, culture, and colonization. She specializes in vested relationship-based and historically contextualized storytelling that centers people in their own stories. Recent work has focused on intergenerational trauma in Cree youth, Wet'suwet'en and occupation of the land and land rights fight, the overrepresentation of unhoused indigenous people displaced in their historic territories, the interrogation of impact of race in her own family. Select clients include National Geographic, Globe and Mail, the Wall Street Journal, BuzzFeed, Maclean's, ESPN, and the list is very long, and we are very proud of you. Select recognition includes World Press and the Marty Forscher Fellowship of and an ICP Infinity Award. Congratulations, Amber, for winning all those prestigious work. And it's a privilege having you today with us this evening. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I have to say I'm a little overwhelmed by the company I find myself in. I didn't have a whole lot of time to consider that I'd be sitting here next to, Senator Mcfedran and Salsala, who's has all this firsthand experience, and Mehmet with his deep knowledge of the situation in Turkey. So I feel a little funny to talk about, my complaints about the state of press freedom in Canada, which relative to places where people are, could realistically see their entire see themselves jailed for life. I think it is not the same comparison. I still think it's worth talking about because press freedom is one of those issues that will sneak up on you, and I think you have to defend it early and vehemently and loudly. And I've found myself almost gradually in my career, I've gradually discovered the limits to press freedom in Canada. So when I first started out, I worked at the Edmonton Sun for the first 6 years of my career, and I was really a generalist as a photographer working on many different stories. And not to say that I didn't face certain opposition or places where I would find sticking points, or I wouldn't have the access that I wanted to, or I might run into a disagreement with police officers. I never really discovered quite how deep this well could go until I started to report in a focused way on Indigenous issues and on colonization. And when I found myself standing next to people who were trying to speak against the state and to speak against the machine of Canadian approvals, right? So I've discovered accidentally that the place where press freedom fails is really in any time that Indigenous communities find themselves in conflict with the reigning powers. And I'm not going to make that conclusion for you, but I think it's worth noting. And it's not just me that has encountered that. We have a history here of journalists who are reporting about and next to Indigenous people who oppose projects or government or whatever the case may be. Those are the journalists that are finding themselves in legal trouble. Those are the journalists who are finding themselves behind bars or in handcuffs. So we've seen it at Fairy Creek. We've seen it at Lineback Lane. Before that, we saw it at the Muskrat Falls Dam project in Newfoundland. And before that, we saw it at Oka. So those were the journalists that got targeted by the government. And, the title of this presentation is about a surveillance. And, even at Oka, they discovered extensive surveillance of those journalists and almost a PSYOPs operation against them, which is quite chilling. So you have to recognize that while we have the appearance of a lot of freedom in Canada, which I do appreciate and I don't take for granted, that when you find yourself reporting on something that's inconvenient for the machine, that's when you will find the limitations to that press freedom. So for me, that has occurred in primarily covering Wet'suwet'en reoccupation of their traditional territories in interior British Columbia. So I don't think it's a secret. I think perhaps it's maybe why I was invited here today, but I found myself arrested in November for documenting their opposition to the project, to the Coastal GasLink pipeline project. And it's something that I've done for several years. I've followed along this story since at least 2018. But in November, there was a small group of people occupying a tiny house, and police came in to clear them from that area. And really the only option for me to be able to do my job, which was to document and to witness what is occurring, especially as a photojournalist, that's my job, is to bear witness and to create a public set of facts of what has occurred that is distinct from, the land defenders or protests or whatever you want to call them, and the police set of facts. So we're in an incredibly remote place. And had I remained outside the tiny house, I absolutely would have been removed before any arrests were made. And so the only way for me to actually witness what was going to occur was for me to stay with the land defenders in the cabin or in the tiny house. And so at that time, that was when they were arrested, and then I was arrested. And despite long conversations and extensive notification to police that I was there that I am press and that was my job, and that my role was there to witness, they didn't let me go. So that was almost the more shocking part, is that they didn't let me go for several days. I was kept in for 4 days or 5 days and 4 nights or something like that. And, I'm fine. I'm like not here to tell you how terrible prison is or jail is, but I'm here to say that that's a significant impact to the public discourse. That was several days of an independent set of facts that was denied from public conversation on an issue that affects not just the Wet'suwet'en, not just the RCMP, not just locals in British Columbia, but has ramifications for nations across British Columbia that are also without treaties. And it has much larger ramifications for our conversation as a nation, and what we're trying to talk about, reconciliation and energy and all kinds of different things. So it was a very important conversation, and the public was denied that set of facts for 5 days completely arbitrarily. And in the end, they did withdraw all charges against me because I didn't do anything illegal. There was no grounds to arrest me in the first place. But really, it's the public who's losing when we are attacking press, or when we're targeting press for trying to function in their role. And what's more concerning is that by doing these kinds of actions, it's a chilling effect on on other journalists continuing to cover it. And I don't need to be. I don't particularly want to be standing there alone. I would love to have my colleagues alongside me, but it's a significant ask to expect somebody to spend some time in a jail cell just to do their jobs, and it's a significant ask to have lawyers on retainer just to do your job. So I think we have a significant amount of work to do in terms of community or relationship with RCMP, and reestablishing not just RCMP, but policing more broadly, but establishing the right of journalists, and a more expansive expectation of access in the public interest. So with that, I don't have that much to talk about, but I'm again really honored to be here, and I hope that we will continue these conversations. And as I say, I absolutely recognize the many things that we do have going for us in Canada, and the many rights and freedoms that we do have, but that there is a limitation to it, and that it requires defense, and it requires a strong backbone, and it requires speaking out when we do find ourselves backed into a corner as journalists. And it's not for us, it's really for the public discourse. We can't talk about it if we don't have a clear set of facts. So thanks, and I'll pass it back to Gary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber. And with your permission, you have sent us a couple of your outstanding sample of work. So if you permit us, we would like to display to our audience some of them. And I would also request you to kindly say a few words about your motivation for this extraordinary photos. Is that all right, Amber?
Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great.
So,
I hadn't so much intended to talk about them individually, but I can. I as I say, my work has evolved around pursuing, exploring these ideas around colonization and the impacts of colonization. So the first image on screen is an installation of children's clothes alongside the highway in Kamloops in relation to the discovery of the children back last spring or last summer. And that installation was put in by a group of local women at the inspiration of Snudetque Manuel, who the idea came to her while she was in court defending herself against a criminal charge that came up from participating in the tiny house warrior. So there's this whole kind of like interconnected relationship. And one of the things that I find kind of interesting about this one is that we all know in Canada, at least, that there's a strong correlation between red dresses and missing and murdered Indigenous women. And but we also have this color orange that is representative of All Children Matter and residential schools. But there's like a kind of not a controversy. There's a big discussion in the New York Times when I filed this about whether or not this were orange clothes or whether they were red clothes. And in fact, they are red. They're not orange, but they look orangish because of the setting sun. But they're red on purpose because Snudetque was trying to make the point that these residential school children were the first disappeared of Indigenous people, that these were some of the first people who were disappeared from their communities was these children. And the first time that I saw this installation, I was absolutely moved by the way that she made visible, made tangible children that we haven't seen or heard from in, hundreds of years or too long. This is the day before the cabin was breached by RCMP and they arrested these women inside. So this was one of the quiet moments. And I am always interested in the interstitial moments on some of these front lines where it's easy to focus on a lot of the drama, and it is important to represent what's happening in terms of like the most intense conflict. But I also, by spending more time on the land, I think you realize that there's more to the story than people looking for a fight necessarily, that there's a reconnection and a relationship building that occurs by spending time on the territories. So this is almost several years ago now, in 2016, that's Standing Rock. And this was December. They had not evacuated camp yet. But for me, I was really struck by the representation of the Oka warrior, like the Mohawk warrior flag, which is the smaller red flag in between, which became famous at Oka in the 1990s. And seeing that in Standing Rock in South Dakota, it really, to me, underscored the borderlessness of some of these issues of colonization and the way that the nations have more in common than they do differences, often in terms of like similar problems. And this is Sabina Dennis. So she's a longtime ally and carrier woman who supports the Wet'suwet'en movement. So she's like a historical neighbor, but she's not Wet'suwet'en herself. But this was the first time that police raided Get-em-Den camp in 2019. And yeah, just her expression, her intensity, I think, has really stuck with me. It's very difficult to capture the intensity of some of these conflicts or these moments, and it's particularly in a single photo. But I think her face tells me a lot, and that's part of why this photo is carried with me. And this is Amy, who's part of a long-term project that I've been working on with her and other Indigenous youth since 2014. And we're focused on the issue of generational impacts, so intergenerational impacts of residential schools for people who've never attended. So Amy herself never went to residential schools, but her grandmother did. And her mother was a MMIW, so she was disappeared when Amy was a young girl. And Amy ended up growing up quite a bit of like conflict in foster care and things like that, and suffered a lot of trauma from the system. So it's 3 generations out now, and she's still rebuilding or regaining some sense of identity and like holistic health. So this is Amy visiting the place where her mom was discovered in 2012.
Thank you very much. Very powerful description of the photos that you have taken. Ladies and gentlemen, we move to the next stage now. And in this particular stage, we welcome moderated discussion, question and answer by our advisor, Mr. Gary Sant. And it's a sort of an open discussion. And we have some questions in mind, but feel free to jump in if you think and if you want to add additional points to our discussion so that our audience are benefited from your insights and from your experience. So let me welcome Mr. Gary Sant. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kauthar. So we've worked on quite a few different panels over time, and I've really appreciated this work. And with World Free Press Day, I actually thought, oh, this should be easy to find some folks that could speak deeply on the subject matter. What I've found is the world is more difficult than one realizes. So the first two potential panelists I had, and I had names and we worked them through a little bit, was one from Mexico and one from India. And in the end, both of them felt it was too unsafe to actually even appear in Canada on this particular subject on this particular day. In Mexico, I was unaware that in the first few days of the year, there's already been 8 Mexican journalists killed. And Mexico and India are among the highest counts of journalists lost. So it's a sobering subject matter, but it's also such an important one. And so I'd like to thank the senator for helping us over time with these panels. And she said perhaps some of the most important words were short, that journalism is the lifeblood of a functioning democracy. That's very powerful, and we should stop and think about that. So if you plot your countries, the countries we're going to talk about a little bit further, and people being injured or killed in their profession, it tracks fairly well between authoritative nations and free nations. So as Amber was saying, we may feel quite lucky in Canada here, but our story of Turkey and Afghanistan teach us that we always have to be vigilant. And so I'd like to thank everyone for speaking on the subject. And for Cicella, it's difficult. You've actually had to leave your country and come to our country. What's interesting in part is that Afghanistan was actually really getting there. So you were mentioning that we had about 11,000 journalists at one time in your country, and there was something in the neighborhood of 500 media outlets. Yeah. So that's probably more media outlets than there are in Canada. So what that tells me is you achieved a fairly high level of functioning journalism there. And maybe you could speak briefly just about the times that you were able to work your journalistic role. And we know now that we have to figure out how to help you regroup over time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. So back in the day when you were in Afghanistan and operating before the Taliban takeover, were you able to enjoy your work, have fairly free access in the country? It still was a dangerous country, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a dangerous country, but not that much when Taliban fall the Kabul and Taliban regime came in Afghanistan. Before that, we have, as I said, we have a vibrant media, and a lot of women work in this media, and they can freedom and they can talk about that they want, about politics, about educational, about economic, and no one targeted them. Now when the people talk about the politics, they can't because the Taliban held them. The Taliban had them. A lot of journalists now in Afghanistan, they had by the Taliban. They tortured by the Taliban, and dangerous for all of Afghan people in this situation in Afghanistan.
Thank you. And do you think that from Canada, you'll still be able to do some journalistic work and be able to send it back into Afghanistan?
Sure, absolutely. I want to continue my knowledge and my new experience from the Canada and share with our people, and I think we can make a media group to work with them, with the journalists in Afghanistan, and they can get safe and they can work.
Thank you. And Mehmet, you were mentioning with Turkey. Here we've got a country that's a NATO member, does work with our countries, and you're sort of in the middle. Like, it's dangerous. How can it be so dangerous in a country that one would have suspected a little more, ease of journalism? Any insights there as to how do you help Turkey get back on a better road?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you think about the history of Turkey, Turkey is the EU candidate and trying to be part of the EU. So, considering Turkey's location in the region, Turkey still has democracy, whether it's fully functioning or not. We can certainly discuss this, absolutely. But it still plays a role model in the region. So this is one of the reasons that a lot of journalists from other, the countries are coming to Turkey, to do their journalistic, sort of practices too. So I do want to, also, I would say in terms of, there are still, unfortunately, these journals are considered oppositions. I mean, when you think about the idea of opposition journalists, what does that even mean to us, right? But the government would consider certain journalists as a sort of a oppositions, where they would basically be against the government's policies. But there is still, there is a functioning journalism with this, despite these challenges, I would say. But also there is a, really great amount of work that journalists are doing to make sure that queer people are visible, women are visible, and they are very visible in the community. So that's why, I don't want to sort of romanticize, what's going on there, because there are a lot of journalists are still doing their jobs. But unfortunately, the government has become more and more, I guess, conservative in the region, and its relationship with Russia, the other countries, is sort of concerning, because on one hand, we are seeing that Turkey is trying to join the EU and to the West, but on the other hand, it's pulled by this authoritarian religious sort of traditions to the east. I guess Turkey has to make this decision where they want to situate themselves, and whether they do want to be part of the EU and have sort of democratic values that they would maintain, or just have a strong tie to these authoritarian sort of traditions. It is concerning for sure, and it's news are not good, absolutely. But I'm just hoping that the solidarity and also the relationship with the EU, Turkey might be pressured more by the EU to just make sure that they respect journalists more.
Thank you. And Amber, you were mentioning that in Canada, after you hear the stories of just these two countries, and as I mentioned, Mexico and India would have been difficult, we realized that we're quite fortunate. But you have seen something important in your work, and so it's really important for you to be a voice for that. So we'd like to thank you just for that opportunity. And I'd like to ask each of you what you would say to young people trying to go into journalism, to take that up as a profession. It obviously, in many respects, is an act of bravery. It's also an act of passion and a fundamental need that we have. So any words that one of you might, or more of you might like to just say to the youth of today? Why did you choose this course? Feel free to jump in.
Amber, do you want to, because you are leading the charge with so much of energy, Do you want to weigh in? Why should young people choose journalism as their career in a very, I would say, hostile world environment? Amber.
Well, I can't speak to everybody's reasons, because I think people will pursue this craft for many different reasons. For me, I think it's a genuine interest in people, and always being interested in other humans and how they live and why they do what they do and all of those kinds of things. So wanting to engage with that and ask people questions. Journalism is a perfect cover for just being really nosy, so it could be really fun. But I think that there's a real big need for connection. We have so many things trying to divide us and to create wedges between this group and that group. And again, journalism is a cover for asking questions and an opportunity to reach out and to find connection and to find common ground between groups that maybe on the surface are not like immediately aligned. And there's so much more need for finding our commonalities rather than always our differences. I think there's plenty out there that makes us oppositional. And then I think beyond that, just that, I think you use the word courage. Somebody's used the word courage, but I do think it takes a certain amount of courage. But it gets easier when you know that it's a conversation worth having, and that there's people relying on, any particular set of facts, just getting into the conversation. So it's not an easy road, but it's very rewarding. So I would say, if you feel that pull to listen to it and at least explore it, please. we could use you.
Thank you.
Well, we'd like to thank you all, as journalists, and it may be like music and poetry, where a lot of artists say they have to do that particular work. It's just in their blood. And again, we thank you.
Thank you, Gary, for conducting the moderated Q&A session. We are absolutely at the end of our session today. Again, traditionally, we go back to our distinguished panelists to listen their last words. And I would follow the same order. I would like to invite Honorable Senator to share her final thoughts, because she's one of the, I would say, sponsors of today's evening and gathering journalists all around the globe. And before I really allow her to speak, let me also share with the audience that the Honorable Senator just moved a motion in the in our Honorable Senate, and might be it is known to some of you. We are so proud, Honorable Senator, for your motion of Ukrainian genocide. And if you allow me to read just a couple of sentences, Senator, the crimes committed by the armed forces of the Russian Federation include mass atrocities in the invaded and occupied Ukrainian territories, systematic instances of willful killings of Ukrainian civilians and desecration of corpses, forcible transfer of Ukrainian children to the Russian territory, torture, and the imposition of life condition causing grave sufferings, and widespread instances of physical harm, mental harm, and rape. And this motion has been moved, Rule 5-5J, and the Senator is the mover. Thank you once again on behalf of our support for the Ukrainian people. Now, Senator, please share your final thoughts today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. And I'll just point out that the identical motion the day before was moved by my colleague, Heather Mcpherson, Member of Parliament. We worked together on the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And when she mentioned it to me, I was like, oh, that's great, Heather. I hope it goes well. And I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and thought, wait a second, we need both. We need the Senate and the House. And I'm just so grateful to my colleagues. It just flowed through. So I have just a closing comment, and it is to say that journalists are the astronauts of truth. And I say that because I'm a lawyer, and there are numerous times when it's only through a journalist looking at the situation from above, seeing the shape that is being taken, often identifying when something is going off track and starting to ask the questions. And as someone who asks a lot of questions myself, I use astronaut because I'm a lawyer or a professor, and I'm in a track. Journalists move up and across and around, and they have an entry point that very few, if any other profession has. So yes, absolutely the lifeblood of democracy, but also the conveyors of all of the oxygen that we need to have high functioning societies where people can truly be free and live their rights. So on this World Press Freedom Day, I thank all of you.
Excuse me, I wanna correct my last speech that I talk about the journalists can work with in Afghanistan. On that time, no, because they killed them. And when we make continue our communication and make a policy and a strategy, it will be work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mehmet, please.
So, well, I would like to thank everyone again. I really, really appreciate each one of your perspectives. I'm glad to have met you all. But Amber sort of touched on that earlier, but really the idea, the medium, changes, the medium of journalism changes. When I was doing my, undergrad in journalism, social media wasn't really that popular, but we are seeing how, the role of social media is just huge. It is changing, but the idea of journalism never changes. We are not necessarily looking for one-sided story, but journalists are a storyteller, and we are trying to just pull all these different perspectives to show people and making sure that public's voices are heard. But thank you again for the opportunity. I appreciate this.
Thank you, Mr. Mehmet. Amber, please.
I just would repeat my call for vigilance. I think we can never become apathetic. We can never stop defending or insisting on a free press. And I mean, like, always defending the borders. There's always going to be a push and pull. And I think we really have to be strong in our position and to be willing to get into the weeds about it. I think that the only chance we have, as the Senator Mcfedran keeps saying, that there's a democracy, the lifeblood of a democracy is a free press. It's the only metric that we have for checks and balances on all of the institutions of power is the opportunity to ask questions. And it's not actually that journalists are special, it's that we're representatives of the people, we're representatives of the communities, and it's the right of everyone to know what's happening in the halls of power. And so let's never take that for granted, and always ask questions, and just be resolute in our insistence that we continue to have a free press. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm just amazed by, like I said, the amazing company I find myself in today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber, for such a wonderful closing. And I don't think I feel myself inadequate to add more words after she has spoken. Nonetheless, on behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada and our advisor, Gary Sant, we thank you very much for coming and spending time with us, sharing your wonderful experiences. And our heart goes out to the children of Afghanistan, the females of Afghanistan, those who are toiling day and night to get education, to establish a free society. And we are very hopeful, people like Salsala Naseri, who has come here, and I'm sure her contribution will continue to support her people back in Afghanistan. And of course, Mr. Mahmoud's wise words with regards to Turkey, which is in the crossroad now, especially during the Russo-Ukrainian war. And I hope Turkey would definitely emerge as a bastion of democracy, as we always aspire. And I would also like to end by saying that Honorable Senator Marilu Mcfedran supports a free society, and her activities we have shared briefly today with you inspires us always. And she, what a beautiful metaphor she used today. Journalists are cosmonauts, astronauts, those who see the society from above, unlike any other profession. So with these sage words, I would like to conclude the session today. Please be with us, and those who are with us already 14,000 views in our social media platform. No disregard to the mainstream media though, but we live in social media situation today. So we thank our audience to listen in, and please be with us because your support matters. And today a journalist they all are working everywhere. We support their work, and we think they bring truth to the power. Thank you. Stay well and stay safe wherever you are. Goodbye and good night.